Today's lesson is called Using the Graphing Calculator to Graph in Slope-Intercept Form. So for part one of today's lesson, in order to use the graphing calculator for linear functions, the equation must be in slope-intercept form. So that means y equals mx plus b form, where m is the slope of the linear function and b is the y-intercept. So I want you to first start that as a beginning opening practice. You are going to put the following equations in slope-intercept form, which means you're solving for y, and then also identify the m and the b. So at this time, please pause the video, try questions A through D on your own, and then resume the video to go over the answers. All right, in part A, you had y minus 3x equals 1. So we have to get everything away from y, which means in this problem, we should be adding 3x to both sides. Y is then alone, which means y is equal to 3x plus 1. So the slope, m value is 3 or 3 over 1. And the b value, y-intercept, is 1 or the coordinate 0, 1. In part B, want to get y by itself, I have to subtract the 5. Then y is alone, and we have y equals 1/2 x minus 5. That makes the slope 1/2, so m equals 1/2, and the y-intercept, b, is -5, or a coordinate of 0, -5. Then in part C, I need to get the x's away from the y's, so I'm going to subtract 6x from both sides. Then we get 2y equals -6x plus 4. I don't want 2y, I just want one single y alone on that side. So we're going to divide every single piece by 2. Make sure not to leave any piece out. That gives you y equals -3x plus 2, which makes your slope or m value -3 or -3 over 1, with a y-intercept or b value of +2, which is the same as 0, 2 as a coordinate. And then in part D, x plus y equals 25. You should be subtracting x from both sides. Y is already alone to give you -x plus 25. So your slope, m equals -1 or -1 over 1. And your y-intercept, b equals 25, which means it starts at a coordinate of 0, 25. So now we will move on to part 2. Part 2 says, now that we have a graphing calculator, what you learned to do by hand in 8th grade can now be done efficiently using the graphing calculator. So we're going to go through step by step and talk about exactly how this graphing calculator can help us graph. And the first step is why we did part 1. You have to make sure your equation is in slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. So I'm not going to have you take a new one and do that just yet. We'll use one of the ones from part 1, A through D, so that we can just use one that's already in the proper form. We already practiced getting it into that form, and we'll move forward with that example for now. So we're going to write down our equation from part 1, example B, which was originally y plus 5 equals 1/2 x. So our changed one was y equals 1/2 x minus 5. And then we'll just put down here a little star. It was originally y plus 5 equals 1/2 x. So we are now going to go to step 2, which is to click the y equals button and type the right side of the equation into the calculator. So we're looking now at the graphing calculator. We are going to click the y equals button. If you have anything in there, please clear it out. Also, make sure none of the plots are on at the top. So do you see how my plots, I have one red and 2 blue? That probably means that this plot is on. So I'm going to arrow up, hit enter, and make sure that it's off. So now they're all off. On your graphing calculator, I believe they will be darkened if they are on. So make sure they are not darkened or highlighted. The problem with having plots on is it will not allow you to graph on a regular coordinate grid. So you always want to make sure you check that if you're having any trouble graphing. We are going to type in the right side of the equation as it says on our notes for step 2. So we want to get a fraction, alpha y equals, and we pick number 1. We are going to put 1/2 and then arrow over to the right. Now the variable key is the key right next to the green alpha button. So when you push that, you will have an X and then -5. Be very careful of when you should be using subtraction on the right-hand side or the negative key, which is underneath the 3. So here we should have just put 1/2 X minus like a subtraction sign, 5. Now, step 3 in your notes says to click zoom, then 6 to preview what the graph will look like in the standard graphing window. So we're going to follow those directions here on the calculator. We're going to press the zoom button, which is one of the graphing buttons that you have at the very top of your calculator. Zoom is right in the middle. You're going to hit zoom and then pick option 6. Now you can either arrow down to get to 6 or you can just hit the number 6. And the reason we like to do this is because it gives you a preview of what the graph will look like. It's not perfect because these screens aren't that big. So to be exact about the coordinates, I'll show you what we're going to do next. But it gives you a nice idea of what it should look like. And the reason we pick Zoom 6 is because as we move forward in the year, you're going to be doing a lot with your graphing calculator. You might be changing the way the table looks. You might be zooming in or zooming out of different graphs. So to make sure we always go back to the standard -10 to +10 window, we're always going to graph by hitting Zoom 6 and not just pushing the graph button. So now when it says for step 4, we're going to click second, then graph to view the table of values for this equation. So second and graph gets us to the table. And you can see here we have a full table of values that we can use to know exactly the location of our coordinate points. And we can use this table now as the work to create our graph on paper. Now, when I'm looking at this table, I hope you see what I see, that some of these values aren't as easy to plot as others. So when you are copying a table down, please feel free to skip over certain numbers. So for example, when I look at this, if I go up a little bit, -4, -7 is a nice point, but I would prefer not to graph -3, -6.5. So I would just go from -4, -7 to -2, -6. I'm going to write down the nice ones. And these other points that have fractional values will get hit by us creating the line on our graph paper. So let's go back to our notes and we are going to pick some of these points to write down as our coordinates. I'm going to start with that -4, -7, then -2, -6. I'll probably then pick 0, -5, and so on. So we already did step 2. We typed it in. We hit Zoom 6 to look at a preview of the graph. We then clicked second graph to view the table of values. So now in step 5, we're going to create a table of values below. This is going to be used to graph our equation. So I'm going to make a note of what we said. We want to pick easiest points to plot. So it's not that you can't plot fractional values, but it's easier to plot the ones that are nice on the grid, and those other values will be hit when we draw the line. So I'm going to do -7, -7, -2, -6, 0, -5, and if I keep looking at the table, the next nice one is 2, -4, and then 4, -3. So then I can come over to the graph and plot those points. -4, -7, -2, -6, 0, -5, 2, -4, 4, -3, and 5 points is plenty to see what's going on. I will then take my ruler and I will connect these points with a straight line, really making sure that I extend and fill up the space. I will then put arrows on both ends to show that this is continuous. Remember, this is just a snapshot. Those 5 coordinates, there are more coordinates. There's infinitely many solutions to an equation in 2 variables. So we want to show that by putting those arrows on the end. And then we also want to make sure we label. We usually label with the original equation. So that was y plus 5 equals 1/2 x. And let's just take a look. So we created a table of values. I want to point out down here that it says, note, this work must be shown for full credit when graphing using this method. So we did it by hand in the previous lesson, and you know for work you must write down m equals and b equals, the slope and y-intercept. If you're going to use the graphing calculator instead, then you have to show me a table of values as your work for the graph. So in step 6, we draw the graph of the equation below using that table of values. Note, be sure to add arrows and a label for full credit. And then if you take a look, you can see those characteristics from the front page that we determined. Once we had it in the right form, the slope should be 1/2. So I'm going up 1 to the right 2. That still happens. And then you can see that it's crossing here at -5 at the coordinate 0, -5. Okay? And again, just remember to label with the original. So this is nice as an algebra student that you have the graphing calculator to use as support and as an option and method for graphing in slope-intercept form. And that concludes our lesson on using the graphing calculator to graph in slope-intercept form.